What's going on YouTube? Yamaha, welcome to the channel. And in today's episode, guys, we're going to change out an O-ring on my 2018 R1. Apparently, it's a pretty common leak on these plastic hoses that are mounted to the engine block. We're going to replace that O-ring. And if you guys want to learn how to do it, stick around, stay tuned, and enjoy. If any of this content interests you, do me a huge favor. Don't forget to hit the like button. If you want, go ahead and subscribe to the channel and hit the bell notification to be notified of all new uploads. Alright guys, this is my 2018 Yamaha R1 and I'm going to squeeze down here guys because this is super hard to see with the naked eye, but if you look into the R1 engine, which is really hard, it's basically past this frame slider, you will see that there is a plastic hose. Let me see if I can get the light close enough. There's a plastic hose that's right there. I don't know if you guys can see it, but you could see that screw that's right there on the bottom. That is a plastic water line. It's got an O-ring that's behind it that attaches to the engine block, which this is the engine that's right here to the left. And it is dripping radiator fluid just ever so lightly. I saw this the other day and I was wondering, what is this coming from? So as I started to inspect the bike, I looked in here really closely and my neighbor actually helped me spot it. That hose that's right there, that plastic hose, is just dripping here and there. A little coolant, nothing major. So we went down to the Yamaha dealer and we got the O-ring to replace that. So guys, to get easier access, I'm gonna remove this screw that's here. There's actually one on the opposite side. There is a bolt that's right here in the middle and there's one that's also down here on the bottom. We're gonna remove those to just kind of drop this oil cooler so we could actually reach those screws to remove that plastic line to change out the O-ring. All right guys, I went to my local Yamaha dealer and after looking at RevZilla and just kind of peeking around, this is the O-ring that is basically compromised, and there's the actual part number. It's 93210-27778, and I think this was like $3. Now there are 3 that they were saying that needs to be replaced. 1 is on the engine block and 2 actually connect down to the water pump, but guys, I'm just going to replace the engine block one because that is the only one that's leaking, and as the other ones start to leak, I'll replace those pretty easily because it's pretty accessible once you take off the plastics. You have to remove all the fairings off this bike just to get easier access, guys. I tried to do it without it and it's pretty impossible, so I took off the plastics on both sides. I'm going to drop that oil cooler down and then I'll have enough room to get my socket in there to remove those 3 screws and to replace the O-ring with the new one, and hopefully it won't leak anymore. Alright guys, go ahead and get a 5mm Allen key. There's a screw that's right here and there's one on the opposite side as well. There's also one down here as well. Go ahead and do that one. Drop this a little bit out of the way. Just makes it a little easier to work with because you have to gain access to those screws from here and it's kind of a pain in the butt. Alright guys, those are the 3 screws that we have to remove in order to get to that O-ring, and it's kind of a pain in the butt. And like I said guys, I had to drop the oil cooler just so I can get access to these screws. So now that you know what it looks like, I don't even know if I'll be able to record because the camera's kind of in the way, but I'll try and let's see what happens. Alright guys, that's too tight of a squeeze to have the camera and use the socket. So what I'm going to do is just remove it and I'll show you guys what it looks like after I take it off. Alright guys, those are the 3 screws that you got to take off, and as you see, they're off already. And all I got to do now is take out one more screw to loosen up this hose. Alright guys, once you go ahead and follow that hose down, this screw that's right here, you have to remove this screw so that way you can pull that hose away from the engine block to change out the O-ring. Make sure you put something under it because it's going to leak. Alright guys, as you can see, I have that plastic hose separated from the engine block and you can just barely see that O-ring from this angle. I don't know if you can see it, but you can just barely see it. There it is right there. So I got to remove that O-ring and replace it with the new one. So what I did was I just wedged something under here to give it some space, and then I'm going to go ahead and try to remove that O-ring and then replace it with the new one. Alright guys, I don't know if you can see it, but that O-ring right there in this corner is pretty flat compared to the rest of it. So that's probably what the issue is. Too compressed and not making a good enough seal. So hopefully with the new O-ring will be a lot more round, fill in that gap, and it won't leak anymore. But this thing is pretty flat. I could just feel it with my fingers. You can see it right there on that corner. I don't know if you guys can look at it right there, but You can tell it's pretty flat on the corner there, so, and it's even got that little indentation there on the top, so this definitely has to be replaced. And just by looking at them side by side, guys, you could obviously see that this one has some indentations, this one does not, especially right there in that corner. Definitely a lot different, so let's go ahead and change this out. All right, guys, so unfortunately the spacing on this is just too tight. There's just no way for me to get there, so what I'm gonna have to do is remove the exhaust, separate it, move them out the way, so I can put my hand there, put the O-ring, tighten it up, and then put the exhaust back. So it kind of sucks, but without breaking these plastic hoses from bending them, that's really the safest way to go, so you gotta do what you gotta do. All right, guys, now with the headers removed, you can actually see what I'm talking about here. The leak was actually coming from here, and I already removed the O-ring, but you can see that the spacing here is really tight. I mean, you can't even really pull this off. Now that I have more space, I could probably put the O-ring without removing all that piping there. I had to remove all the plastics, drop the oil cooler, remove the stock headers. That way I can have access to put that O-ring. And that's basically where it's leaking from, guys. Right in that weird little spot, man. Such a pain in the butt, but I got it out. And hopefully, guys, I can continue on from here with no issues. All right, guys, I got everything tightened up. Go ahead and use the manual for the torque settings on those screws and make sure that you got those header gaskets in place. I had 2 of them fall out, so I just put them back in. And I went ahead and lubed up the bolts that are there, so that way down the road, there's not a lot of rust to remove those header bolts. And I'm just gonna reverse everything I did. And that's basically how you change that O-ring. It's a pain in the butt. Definitely easier if you just take off the headers. I know that's a lot of work, but it only took about another half an hour and maybe even less, maybe like 20 minutes. And it makes a lot of room so you don't have to wrestle with it, and make sure everything is back in place. I'll show you guys the final product here in a second, and we'll make sure that it's not leaking. All right, guys, here's a little trick that I learned a while back. I just put some tie wrap around the headers right under those gaskets. That way, as I'm working this, they don't keep sliding down. I don't know if you guys have ever tried to change some headers, but these things don't really stay up there too easy. So as you're trying to wrestle this, they keep sliding down. It's a pain in the butt. So I just kind of zip tie it like that real loose, and I use it to keep those gaskets kind of up in the air, or those collars up. And then once I'm done and I'm tightening them up, I just go ahead and cut them and remove them. All right, guys, real quick, get some denatured alcohol, pour it on a rag, and go ahead and wipe down all your exhaust to get all your fingerprints off so it doesn't stain it once you turn the bike on. So I usually just do the can, then I go ahead and do the pipe all the way through. Make sure everything is tight back in place. Boom, all the way up here. All right, guys, go ahead and get your engine ice. Go ahead and fill it up since we dumped so much out in that pan. I had to remove again the exhaust all the way, the headers, drop the oil cooler down just to get access to that O-ring spot there, because once I remove those bolts, I could not get my hand in that little spacing to put the O-ring back in place properly. So we had to do it the hard way, but the hard way goes the right way. And guys, that is pretty much it. I am filthy, dirty, nasty. And I apologize, I've been laying on the floor sweating for about an hour. But I'm gonna let this bike run a little more. I'm gonna check it again. And now you guys too can change that O-ring against the engine block on that housing there. So guys, thanks for watching the channel. Be blessed, ride safe, take it easy on them filthy streets. And remember, you gotta work on Monday.